All right, guys, it's time for the Next Level Guy Show, a men's interview, interest, and improvement-focused podcast featuring interviews with the greats from all industries to help you better your life. Each week, a new episode features an interview with one of the greats, covering all aspects of their story, from life hacks to tips and protocols that have allowed them to live life on the next level. We then highlight concrete action steps that you can use to improve your life. And now, your host, Ian Dawson McKay.
And today's special guests are Steve Murphy and Javier Peña. DEA Special Agents Javier Peña and Steve Murphy were assigned as the lead investigators targeting Escobar and his Medellin Cartel organization. These true American heroes provide a first-hand lesson in history as they discuss their efforts bringing down the world's first narco-terrorist, the challenges they faced in oftentimes hostile and life-threatening environments, and the innovative strategies they employed to successfully end the reign of the terror of the world's most wanted criminal. And in this first outing, we look at how the Netflix series Narcos matched the real investigation. We discuss their story, training, how they found Colombia, the role of the local population, their thoughts on Escobar, and so much more. Thank you guys so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
I've been a big fan of both of you now for years. But unfortunately, a lot of people only know you through Narcos. Not a lot of people know the actual events. And you brought out a fantastic new book, which you gave me the privilege of a free copy to sort of read before the interview. But for people who don't know you, you're considered heroes, but you see yourself as just law enforcement, which I think is underselling what you did. Could you just give a quick overview of who you are and why you're sort of legends in law enforcement?
Hi, I'm Steve Murphy. I'm a retired special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration in the United States. I spent 26 years as an agent, but I was a police officer for almost 38 years here in the U.S. Started out in the local community as a uniformed police officer, then went to the railroad police, and then became an agent with DEA. Throughout my career, I was stationed in Miami, Florida, then Bogota, Colombia, from there to Greensboro, North Carolina, then Atlanta, Georgia, to Washington, D.C., back to Atlanta, and then I finished up my career in Washington. I retired from DEA in 2013, and shortly after that, started a very, very small consulting business in conjunction with my partner, Javier Peña, in which we taught classes for U.S. military special operators. I probably shouldn't say more than that. Worked on some other contracts, but along came Narcos, and so now we travel around the world telling the true story about Pablo Escobar. We try to invoke humor into it. It's not a lecture. We do tell a story, but we try to make it as interesting as we can. We have videos. We have a ton of photographs. Just try to have a good time with the audience. And we even have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, so the audience can ask us questions about the investigation, about the making of Narcos. We even talk about our personal lives to a certain degree. So it's last thing I ever thought I'd be doing in retirement. I got to be honest with you.
Okay, this is Javier Peña, and I was with the Drug Enforcement Administration as a special agent for 30 years. And I also, like Steve, started off with the local law enforcement department, which was the sheriff's office in Laredo, Texas. A lot of people don't know where Laredo is. It sits right on the border of Mexico. The border town is called Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. The U.S. side is Laredo, Texas. Anyway, I did 7 years for the sheriff's office. Then I wanted to, just see what federal law enforcement was all about. So I applied with the DEA, got accepted. And like I said, after 30 years, and I retired. But my career in DEA was I started off in Austin, Texas, which is the capital of Austin. Did 4 years there. Then went to Colombia and I was stationed there for 6 years in Bogota. Did a lot of work in Medellin, Colombia. After Medellin, I get promoted as a group supervisor for San Juan, Puerto Rico. Then I go to our DEA headquarters, where we did our headquarters time. Then got promoted again as the number two guy. Went back to Colombia and did 2 years there. And after Colombia, went again as the boss of San Antonio, Texas, and got promoted to the special agent in charge, which is our highest position, to San Francisco, California. Then after San Francisco, I went to Puerto Rico, was also the agent in charge. Then after Puerto Rico, Houston, Texas, again as the agent in charge until I retired. And like I said, I was not expecting, but all of a sudden I had been on the job for 30 years.
It's amazing when you sort of like listen to that history and that wealth of experience. But I mean, when you read the book, it kind of blows you away about the differences between how the Narcos series sort of publicized the history and how it actually happened. I mean, when they're talking about Javier moving melons and killed a snake with one, and Steve being a railway cop and things like that, I love the how it fleshed out your histories. Could you go into a little bit about your backgrounds? Because did you always want to be cops? Did you always want to go into law enforcement?
This is Steve. Ever since I was a little kid, I always wanted to be a police officer. Not sure why. My father was a minister. My mom was a bookkeeper in a local bank. So we didn't have a lot. But, had my first, I guess, run-in with the police when I was very young, about 10 years old, with some buddies out camping. And, it was summertime, and we were spending the night in somebody's backyard. And, of course, when all the adults go to sleep, we'd take our bikes out and we'd go exploring and, getting in trouble and doing things we probably shouldn't be doing. And actually, we didn't have any money, so we were going to break into one of the guys' houses, one of the guys that was sleeping out with us, which was a really stupid idea because his mom probably would have shot us if we'd gotten into the house. But, I guess we really botched things up because in no time, two police officers had shown up and were shining bright lights on us and just scared us to death. And they said, well, boys, we got two options here. One, we can take you to jail tonight and you'll spend the rest of your lives in prison, or we can take you home to your parents. And you know what? We all looked at each other and said, take us to jail. Because we knew what was going to happen when we got home. Of course, they laughed and they took us home anyway. And sure enough, that's what happened. But I guess that left, I never really thought about that until we were writing the book. I guess that left a lasting impression on me that, these guys just came across very professionally and they used common sense. They knew that, we weren't burglars. They knew we were just kids out being mischievous. And so I just kind of pursued that my whole life, not realizing that someday I would become a police officer. Had no idea I'd ever become a DEA agent or a federal agent for that matter. But it's just kind of the way things work out in your life. Fate works out and doors open for you and DEA opened for me. And it turned out to be a lot of fun.
Yes, for me, this is Javier. Yep, I started off, I said, at the sheriff's office in Laredo, Texas. But before that, I grew up in a little place called Hebronville, Texas, population 5,000, which is located 50 miles out of Laredo. Anyway, my dad was a rancher. I worked a lot at the ranch. In the summer, I picked watermelons. And if you've ever picked watermelons, that's a hard job. They're about 30, 40 pounds in that hot sun. You got rattlesnakes. To this day, I will never eat a watermelon, and I hate rattlesnakes. Anyway, so went to college, and there was an internship position open. I was a freshman, and it was at Texas Department of Corrections, which is in Huntsville, Texas. That's where all the prison system for the state is. So anyway, I learned a lot working there for 3 months. And a buddy of mine, friend of mine, calls and says, hey, there's a sheriff in Laredo who's looking for new guys. I know him. You want to apply? So I applied, and you know what? I got selected. I had my grandparents. I lived with my grandma. I had the best of both worlds. I was working the night shift at the sheriff's office, going to school during the day, got my degree. And I'd been there working for about 7 years until I saw an announcement that the federal DEA was hiring. So I applied, and with me, I did not know what DA was. I had to ask somebody, but they were paying a lot more than at the sheriff's office. So I came on, and then all of a sudden, I get selected to Austin, Texas. In Austin at that time was the music industry of the world. All the bands. Remember, George Strait was starting off. It was just the music industry in Austin was starting off. So I really enjoyed it, and then that's what led me, work there. And then I just wanted to see what the real narcs, the guys who were running the empires, was all about. That's why I applied for to go to Colombia.
It's amazing when you sort of read the book of how you assume that like something like this would have been your calling, and you'd have been training for this for years, and you'd have been assigned this sort of mission to go and take out one of the world's most dangerous men. But it's amazing how it kind of just sort of flows from step to step by step. But can you go into a little bit about how the DEA is set up and the training and that sort of thing? Is it just like any other kind of law enforcement, because it's got a singular mission of eliminating, the drugs? But how? What was the appeal of the DEA? Was it just the scope of its mission, or the fact that you could travel abroad and this sort of thing, compared to like the FBI and that?
Well, for me, I've been watching Miami Vice on TV, and man, I thought that's really cool because if it's on TV, it must be true, right? Which is a joke. But it just when I became a city police officer, I was still a rookie, and a partner, not a partner, but a friend, a fellow police officer, and he was a rookie also. We had another friend who worked in a gas station who told us, hey, there's this kid running around town selling pound quantities of weed. Well, in 1976, in southern West Virginia, that's where I was living at the time, that was a lot of dope. So we set it up, and the guy, he came to the gas station, and sure enough, he brought a pound of weed, and we stepped out of the back room, and it wasn't we pounced out with our guns or anything. We just stepped out and said, hey, how you doing? And we took the pound, we tested it, and it tested positive. We said, you're under arrest. Well, it turns out the kid was 17 years old. So, we took him to the police station, and his father showed up. And after we talked to his dad for a while, we realized the punishment was going to be worse at home than it would ever be in a jail. So, we talked to the prosecutor and dismissed the charges. We never charged the kid with it. That was in 1976. Just a few months ago, I got an email from this guy. I didn't remember his name, but it wasn't an email. It was a message on Facebook. And he was saying, hey, I'm the kid that you cut a break when I was 17 years old. Now I'm a professional businessman. Just wanted to say thank you for giving a dumb kid a break at that time. And we've kind of become friends now. But the excitement of doing that, reaching out and surprising somebody like that when they had no idea what was going on, and they thought the local police were stupid. We had no idea that drugs were going on in our area. It was always very intriguing. And, then as a uniformed police officer, and then later as a railroad policeman, the narcotic side of things just seemed like it presented a challenge that was, could be very exciting. Whether you're working undercover, or you're doing surveillance, or running informants, whatever it might be. And then as a railroad policeman, one of my fellow agents there was a former Virginia state trooper who worked on a DEA task force. And he used to tell me stories about the cases he worked and how they would develop into national cases. And then some of them would even go international. And I thought, that just sounds like what I'd really, really like to do. So that's what kind of hooked me into DEA. I honestly didn't know what DEA was. I applied. It took 2 years to get accepted. And then when you go to the academy, it was like I'd gone through the West Virginia State Police Academy. It was similar to that, except that we were living there full time for, I think when I went through, it was 13 weeks. It was rather rigorous. It was PT every day. You were on the firearms range almost every day. Even if you weren't doing PT through a scheduled class, you were out running, and, they like to go on 5 to 10 mile runs and keep you in shape. And
it's just the sound of that is scary.
It's when you're younger, it's a lot easier. But they had pretty strict rules. It was nice living quarters, no complaints there. But if you didn't meet the standards on firearms, you get fired. If you couldn't meet the standards for physical training, you got fired. And if you failed 2 academic tests, they let you go. So their standards were pretty high, and you were expected to meet them. but rightfully so. So, when I started the class, I think there were 50 of us that started our class, and we graduated 42, I believe it was, because they were serious. If you couldn't meet the standards, they let you go, even though they had invested money in your background investigation and everything. They, I mean, this sounds kind of self-serving, and I don't mean it to be, but they wanted the best that they could get. And you figure back then, I think if they were going to select 50 people for a new DEA class, I want to say there were something like 5,000 applicants for those 50 positions. So it was very competitive, but it turned out to be the best agency I could have ever selected. There's an old saying that says if you find a job you like, you'll never work a day in your life. Javier and I, we found that job working for DEA.
This is Javier, and I remember going through the DEA Academy, and I had been through our Sheriff's Office Academy, which is a local law enforcement. That was only about 8 weeks. There was some training, some physical training, but it was light. The tests were easy. It wasn't complex. When I got to DEA, the Training Academy, wow, was I in for a surprise. There's a lot of stress involved. Like Steve mentioned, there's 2 tests. If you fail that, if you didn't meet the physical requirements of running, keeping up, yeah, we're running 4 or 5, I think, miles a day. I went in at about 200 pounds and I came out of the academy at 180. So that's should do that again right now. I need that. So it was a lot of vigorous, the stressful, and knowing that you can be fired. So it wasn't anything easy for me because I wasn't used to it. So, and you know what? I hadn't realized when I came on. Like you said, I did not know what DEA was until I got hired on. And the only reason I applied was DEA was paying. I think it was $17,000 a year at the time. At the sheriff's office, I was making like 9 or 10,000. This is back in the late '70s. Got hired in '84. But anyway, so and you know what, I started liking it because it wasn't going after the user or the guy smoking pot. It was going after the echelon, the highest person on the organization, and the practicals. We used to practice with. They would have real actors acting as crooks, so you'd have to follow them. You'd have to work the case, and the cases are hard to work up. So it's a different style of surveillances, electronic intercepts, some undercover involved, and you were always trying to lead up to the highest person in the organization. So to me, that was like, wow, this ain't just hey, this guy just sold me an ounce, we're gonna arrest him. It wasn't nothing like that. It was just the complex organization of a complex criminal organization. So you learned all the different laws in all the different theories, and again, you had to pass everything from the physical to the aptitude test to the firing range. So I started liking the job, and that's what when I came on in Austin, Texas. I mean, I did a lot of street work, did a lot of undercover surveillances. You're learning how to build the case, and this is what I liked about being a DEA agent.
I mean, it's quite remarkable when you read the book about the level of quantity of drugs that was involved, but it only became kind of like a massive sort of national wide issue sort of in the 70s and 80s. Could you go into a little bit about like why do you think Escobar was so successful in the initial period, and what kind of quantity are we talking here? Because there's times you're mentioning 300 to 400 keys, and it's really hard to visualize that. How much would a key roughly have cost back then, and it's hard to fathom the amount of money that they could have possibly been making back then.
Yeah, well, and I'll go first. I get to Colombia in '88, so I see the drug distribution at that level. I remember one of the first cases was on a commercial airline. I'll never forget. We got a call. Javier, I think it was one of the cops called up and says, "You may want to come to the Bogota El Dorado airport." All right, and it was a commercial airline, well-known airline. I'm not going to mention the airline, but anyway, not even they didn't even try to hide it. It was just in the belly of a plane. 800 kilos of cocaine. That was like one of the first cases, and it was just in boxes. in the cargo area. You open the box, they didn't camouflage it with fruit stuff or try to, like I said, sometimes they put vegetables, or fruit, whatever, machinery. It was just in boxes. That was my first experience
Jeez, that's
watching.
arrogance.
Yeah, yeah. This is, like I said, I remember 1988 en route to Miami. It was no big deal back at the time. So that was my experience with cocaine. Then all of a sudden, again, we start getting into Pablo Escobar, and we had nobody realized who Pablo Escobar was. No one really was targeting him. The targeting came after the violence, after every time there was a seizure, for example, in Miami, it came back to Pablo Escobar. So it was in the mid '80s, and if you've seen the movie Scarface, and I always ask people, and 90% of the people have seen Scarface. That was pretty accurate description of what was going on in Miami. The violence and the cocaine. You mentioned the price of the kilo of cocaine. That was going for about $80,000 in Miami during the mid '80s, and there's a lot of businesses, a lot of properties that were bought with cocaine money during this time. So, to make it in the jungles of Colombia was about $5,000. So that's your initial investment of producing it, transporting it. Once you got to Miami, 1 kilo, $80,000. In Europe, if you were to send a load into Europe at this time, that kilo was going for about $100,000 of, for 1 kilo of cocaine. Then if you go into when you cut up that kilo, you could cut it up, 4 or 5 times. It just depends. But anyway, your initial investment was going to be about 70,000 to 80,000 for 1 kilo of cocaine. And you mentioned this is why Pablo Escobar cornered the market. He was responsible for 80% of the cocaine that was reaching the world, and this is during the mid '80s. So it wasn't millions; it was billions, billions coming back to Pablo Escobar in Medellin, Colombia.
It's terrifying, like that level of quantity. I mean, Steve, you sort of got interactions with that through and based in Miami. Was the Narcos portrayal of your time there with Kevin and that sort of thing? Did that really kind of showcase the true level of violence and depredation that was coming in from the smuggled drugs at the time?
The violence that was going on in South Florida in the mid to late 1980s was worse than what you saw on the show. Kevin, they show in the series, my partner, his name is Kevin, and they kind of show him as a fat, dumpy guy, and he ends up getting killed. Well, my real partner there his name was Kevin, but he was a former U.S. Marine. He was in great shape. He didn't get killed, but he did get shot twice in a deal we had go bad in Hialeah, which is one of the suburbs of Miami there. It seemed like what I had learned as we were working the bigger cases is the bigger the dealer, the less violence there was. I know that sounds kind of strange because there's a huge amount of violence associated with all these narcotics organizations. But when you're going to arrest people, it seemed like the street dealers, if you were going after them, which we rarely did, but when I was a uniformed police officer, they would always fight. They might have weapons on them. You had to be very careful. But you're picking up people that are dropping off 500 kilos of coke, and they just raise their hands and surrender to you. I don't know. It just seemed like the bigger the dealer, the less potential for violence there was, at least when it came to being arrested. Maybe that's because they knew they would have the best attorneys, or else they would just post whatever big bond was placed on them, and then they just never come back to the United States. So that was a little bit eye-opening. But to be honest with you, that made the job extremely exciting. I know a lot of people think I'm crazy when I say that. And of course, it was terrible that my partner got shot and the informant was actually killed during that deal. But it was just, maybe there's something wrong with me in my brain. I don't know. But when I was a younger man, I thought that was just so exciting and just loved doing the job. And I just couldn't imagine doing anything else.
I mean, I think we all kind of lust for a sort of adventure and excitement, but maybe maybe not getting shot at. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing about it is people don't see that side of it when they want to go take drugs and this. I mean, I don't use drugs, but you get there's a scene in Narcos where you beat up the guy in the airport bathroom because he's snorting cocaine and stuff like that. A lot of times they don't. People who use don't see the negative effects of drugs. So when you were then both sent on the mission to sort of tackle that from its main source in Colombia, how did you find the transition from your sort of smaller American cities going into what must have been a completely different world in Colombia, where like you were treated as gringos, you were stood out?
Yeah,
Was the level of fight back from the Colombian people as bad as the narco scenes made out? Because you talk in the book about how welcoming they were. Why did was it just Hollywood sized, shall we say, the
no,
narco series of how you found it?
yeah. This is Javier, and I'll go first. For me, that's a good point you brought up. I mean, I was like I said, I worked in Austin, Texas, where it was low level trafficker were making ounce buys. I remember methamphetamine was being manufactured in Austin. We called it ma and pa type labs, and it was easy to make because there wasn't the precursor chemicals at this point were not controlled. So we had a lot of people that were making methamphetamine in hotel bathrooms and kitchens, trailer parks, you name it. So I was watching the lower level of traffic. Or once in a while, we'd get a load of marijuana, 400 or 500 pounds, and coming in from Mexico. So anyway, once I get to Bogota, and I've never been to Colombia before. I had to look it up on the map where it was located. So once I get there, wow, and Bogota's a beautiful city. I think population at that time was like 4 or 5 million. It's a big city, and I'll always remember that the general theory there was, well, you can't trust your counterparts, the cops. They're all dirty, corrupt, and you know what? That was the biggest misconception that there was, that we could not trust the Colombian police. As soon as we started working, they were, what we noticed, it's if you were out there really trying to help them, you know what? They were some of the nicest, most professional people in the world. All of a sudden, we started, developing that friendship with us, and vice versa. And they used to tell us, he says, guys, the reason sometimes we didn't get along with DEA, because man, we give them information, we never get anything back. So we started, what? All of a sudden sharing information with them. Hey, this Miami, that info you gave us led to a seizure. There's some more phone numbers here. There's some people, case, and all of a sudden we started just cooperating with each other. We developed friendships, to this date that we have. So it was very, very different, and there wasn't a lot of consumption in Colombia at this time. I'm not sure now. I'm sure there is some, but it was just the traffickers operating at the highest levels. They were very organized, and they were very violent. So it's something that we had to learn right away how to deal with these people.
Oh, what about yourself, Steve? How did you find that sort of initial transition to going, coming from an American city, very, I think you're sort of English, Irish heritage, coming into that society? I mean, did you find that you were almost sort of reverse racism, even so, like, because you stood out kind of thing? Or did you find coming welcoming into the Colombian initially?
Well, my wife and I, when we got there, obviously we were very nervous. We'd been living in South Florida, which has a huge Hispanic population. Colombians, Cubans, Haitians. Just it was a very eclectic area to live in, and so we had already kind of become accustomed to that. But when you go into Colombia, and their native language is Spanish. Well, DEA sent me to language school, and in language school they taught me to speak proper Spanish. Well, I don't even speak proper English. So
There do
I
I.
and I get down there, and you're very hesitant. You don't want to embarrass yourself, but you use the Spanish. I spoke to them the way I was taught, and they understood every word I said. But then they would answer me back in colloquial sayings and different dialects, uh, and of course they spoke at what was normal speed for them, and I wasn't used to the rapid Spanish, so I had a little bit of a hard time keeping up. But what my wife and I found, and this amazed both of us, was that Colombians are some of the most accepting people in the world. They're open, the hardworking, tax-paying citizens down there that just trying to live honest lives and eke out a living. We're just fantastic people. If you go in there with an open attitude, you use the Spanish that you know. And as an example, my wife, she had no Spanish language training. She knew some words. She'd hear me talking in Spanish, and we had little 3x5 index cards taped to everything in our house, so we could learn vocabulary about, what do you call a refrigerator, a fork, a knife, a chair, everything. And, she knew some very basic sayings. Well, she would go shopping by herself, and then she'd bring something home, and either she decided she didn't like it or it didn't fit. So she'd take it back, and she would negotiate with these people. And I asked her, I said, how in the world do you do that? You can't even speak Spanish. And she said, you know what? I go in and I use the Spanish that I know. I go with a smile on my face. You accept their culture. You're willing to laugh at yourself when you make a mistake. And they bend over backwards for you to help you along. But what we also saw is if you go in with an attitude like, why is it I'm in Colombia and you don't all speak Spanish, English here? Well, they don't have a problem telling you real quick where the airport is and you get the hell out. If you don't like their culture, get out. And that was one of the neat things about working with the cops is Javier and I went in with the attitude that we're going to live like these guys do. We're going to sleep in the same quarters, eat the same food, drink the same alcohol or whatever beverages they had, and be willing to make sacrifices like they were making. And that was the key. And this is not something I developed. This is something Javier developed before I ever got there. And because of the trust and respect that he had earned from the Colombian National Police, they accepted me. I still had to earn their respect, but at least they accepted me initially because I was Javier's partner. And that's how we made it work down there. It was a great surprise to go down and see that the Colombian people were so nice. And just like Javier told you, I was the same way. I expected all the police officers to be corrupt. And to my knowledge, I can think of maybe 4 police officers that, we dealt with over the years that ended up being corrupt. And 3 of them were at such a low level, it really had no impact. It didn't have any negative impact on us whatsoever.
So could you go into a little bit about like what a typical day would have been like back then? I mean, because this is before they would have used like cell phones, they would just been sort of coming out now. But how did you guys kind of, like the Narcos series shows it being like explosions and massive events and firefights every day kind of thing. Well, what was it like trying to source this guy? What kind of tactics were you using in the initial kind of way to counteract? Because it must have been like one of those dogs, where you get the 3-headed dogs where you cut one head off when you make a bust, only for another head to sprout somewhere else. What kind of things were you doing on a day-to-day basis to take down Escobar and his sicarios?
Well, you know what? And I do not know who came up with the concept of us going to Medellin. I mean, it was an invitation from the government of Colombia at the highest level. I think they contacted our ambassador that they said, hey, can we get some help? And since Steve and I had been working with these people with a specialized group of guys that were from Bogota, so we knew them. And we were assigned the Pablo Escobar case from the very beginning. The first search, 1988, then his surrender in 1992. And then after the escape is when it really got interesting. Right after the escape, they asked for us, Steve and Javier, to go to live with in Medellin, and we were there the next day after Pablo Escobar escaped. So I remember going into the prison, Steve and I, and wow, we were in for a rude awakening. It wasn't a prison; it was a country club type setting. Then all of a sudden, like I said, we formed the famous search block, the Bloque de Búsqueda, they used to call it. So we had the specialized group of guys from Bogota, the police, and Steve and I, and we lived in the same same barracks. We had one room. We shared it with other guys. In our typical day, basically was, that we were looking for that intelligence, that information, and we were getting a lot from it from our Miami offices. DEA created a concept of going after anybody associated with Pablo Escobar in the United States and in Europe. We were getting a lot of information and sharing it. The cops would tell us information to go after someone in the United States, informants, the electronic surveillances that we had, and once in a while we'd go out on search warrants with the police. We'd fly out in the choppers. We'd hit a finca, a ranch. Where thought Escobar was hiding. So it was a lot of, like I said, exchange of information. There were a couple of times where it got a little risky. For example, the car bombs. You would leave the base, and Escobar was placing them all over all over the city in Medellin and Bogota. He had our base was located in the middle of a neighborhood in Medellin. It was a poor type neighborhood. So there was a lot of people that were, working for Escobar. Once they see a convoy leaving, there'd be about, 4 or 5 trucks with about 20 officers each. So they knew we were headed out somewhere. And at the beginning, Escobar would be tipped off. He'd be warned by some of the police. For example, we had a couple of guys we did not know that were from Medellin. All of a sudden, Escobar got to their family, says, "If your son doesn't let me know where they're coming, I will kill everybody in the family." So the poor police officer had no choice. He had to, all right, hey, he'd find a way to warn Pablo Escobar. So, like I said, then we just started with people that were not from Medellin. But during the bloody war, during the height of it, the car bombs, the assassinations, the bounties on police officers, the bombs on buildings. I mean, that was tough. But by you asked, our concept was to go after the all of the organization, and I think we were able to accomplish that. If you look, at the end, Pablo Escobar had one Sicario left, where he had 500 in the beginning. But by Steve and I being there with the police, that was just it made a world of difference in that information was being exchanged on a timely basis. And then I think what also topped it off was we started offering a reward. Got up to about $5 million for Escobar's location. So they would call, and they only wanted to talk to the gringos. That was Steve and I. Why? Because they knew we were going to pay. So we had a lot of that going on. So the concept was great. But then again, the violence and the friends we lost, and the innocent people that were killed was just something we had never seen before.
And Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
No, he covered it pretty well. It was it was just a nice surprise that we were allowed to do that. And like Javier said, a lot of people think that, why are these ugly Americans inserting themselves into an international investigation? Well, in the United States, there's a law that covers that, where, if a criminal organization is having a direct negative impact on the United States, we do have the authority to go, to pursue that person or that organization. Well, in this case, the Colombians, they invited us in. We just didn't show up one day and say, "Hey, I'm Steve. This is Javier. We're here to help you with your case." That's just not the way it works. So it was a great working relationship. But we also don't ever want anybody to take any of the credit away from the Colombian National Police simply because two gringos are there. They knew what they were doing. They were great investigators. We faced a lot of dangers during our time there, but they faced multiple dangers on a daily basis there. And you know what? When our time was up, when our tours of duty were over, we got to come back to the United States. They lived there. That's their home. So they were going to have to deal with whatever came along.
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
Now, Escobar had he'd always give back to the poor, and he'd established, like housing and help set up the running water and all these things. So he was almost sort of seen as a Robin Hood to a lot of these kind of like local populations. So how do you start winning, it's a horrible phrase to use, the hearts and minds of the local people? How did you start getting into them and kind of explaining to them what he was doing was wrong? Was it that he started killing like politicians and blowing up the plane and things like that turned the tide, do you think? Or how do you start building the trust and kind of putting the wedge between him and, because this is where he was getting his sicarios from. They were hiding him and helping him. But I'm sure the show made it look like you were fighting the local people as much as the sicarios, which is not true. But what was the reality like?
The sicarios at the beginning, and you gotta like say, if you lived in the poorest areas of Medellin, there wasn't much housing. But if Escobar came in and offered you and gave you money, helped your family, your mom, and I mean, this was told to me by one of the sicarios, and I'll never forget. He says, "You know what? I love Pablo Escobar. I will die for him, and I will kill for him. He took me out of my poverty. My mom has a roof over her head. She's got a refrigerator. She's got food. She's got a stove." And he says, he told me my allegiance is to Pablo Escobar. He said, "I'm 15 years old. And this is during the time of the bounties on police officers." And he admitted to me he had already killed 10 police officers under the orders of Pablo Escobar at $100 a head. I mean, that is pathetic. And he was 15 years old. And he said, "You know what? By 22, 23 years old, I will be dead. I will be killed by somebody else, by another trafficker, another sicario. So I owe my life to Pablo Escobar." And Pablo Escobar had when we used to intercept him, he had a message that he would say, "There's a meeting at La Terraza tonight." La Terraza. Nobody knew what La Terraza was. We would hear it, the terrace in English. And you know what I found out about 5 years ago? What that terrace was? That terrace was at an old Catholic church in the poorest neighborhood in Medellin, and it had a terrace around it. Pablo Escobar used to go himself, and there'd be 100, 200 of these young thugs, 13, 14, 15, all waiting for the boss. And Pablo used to arrive there, man. He was like the king. And he'd hug all the sicarios, right? "Hey, so many of you are gonna work. Look for this guy. Come to tomorrow." So he had that going for him. And Escobar had that charisma. You gotta admit it. And then you talk about that Robin Hood, and yep, he did build homes for the poor, gave money to the church, hospitals, soccer fields. But in the end, he wanted loyalty. He expected loyalty. And if he told a sicario, "Hey, wipe out that innocent family of five, kill everybody, the mom, the dad, the grandmother," the sicario would not think twice about it. So and Steve and I, we do presentations, and we've mentioned it on the real history of Pablo Escobar. And we always get that Robin Hood, and we dispel that myth. Robin Hood didn't put a bomb on a commercial airline.
Mm.
Robin Hood didn't kill 10 to 15,000 innocent people. Robin Hood didn't kill the next president of Colombia. So we dispel that myth. Pablo Escobar wanted sicarios, and he paid them he respected, he paid them money and respected loyalty in the end.
So, I mean, you guys have gone into some of the most dangerous situations, chasing people. These guys who are taking life at such minimal amounts of payments, and they were just looking to sort of better themselves. And the violence that was being used, and, people were craving drugs and willing to use violence to get them, and all these kind of scenarios and different cartels, etc. But how do you deal with overcoming that level of fear? How did is it just from your training? Is it just from your reference points of your experience as police officers? What did you learn about kind of fear and what you're capable of doing during such a dangerous time with car bombs and assassinations and all? Because you guys just went out day after day till you achieved your mission. What did it teach you about fear and overcoming it in that point?
Well, we did. We lived in Medellin for 18 months with the Colombian National Police. We were going out almost every single day on operations with them. And we'd love to tell you that we were never scared, that we're some kind of tough guys. The truth is, we're not tough guys. We're a couple of small town country boys, is what we are.
That's
But
tough in my book.
well, for whatever reason, people ask us, do we get scared? Of course we got scared, and you got all these murderers out there that, they're just killing like Javier said. I mean, all Pablo had to do was point at somebody and they would be killed because there was that much loyalty from the sicarios. But we it's not like it was in the show where it shows Javier and I run across the rooftops of Medellin, Colombia, in these running gun battles. That didn't happen. We never did anything by ourselves. We didn't act unilaterally. We were always with the Colombian National Police, and typically we were with a very elite group of Colombian National Police officers. The name of their unit was DIJIN, DIJIN is how it's spelled, and it's an acronym. I don't remember what it's about, but these are the guys that we lived with on a daily basis, worked with, ate dinner, went to the bars, everything. We did it all together with them. And if you think about this, for whatever reason, Javier and I had the ability. I don't know that we still have this ability today, but back then we had the ability that when the shit hit the fan, when things got hot, we got scared. But you have to be able to control that fear, because if you let fear take over, you're going to do something stupid and you're going to get yourself killed. And just as an example, if somebody starts shooting at you, your natural instinct is to run away. Well, our natural instinct was to find something to hide behind, to protect yourself. And that's what you should do, because if you're running away, you're probably going to be in the open. Now, if you're exchanging shots, we both did have some additional tactical training. There's a very basic concept called shoot and move. You don't keep shooting from the same location, because they'll hone in, they'll zero in on that location. But we just, quite honestly, we just thank the good Lord that we survived down there. People say, well, how did you survive? Well, because of the trust and respect that we had developed with the DIJIN guys, the Colombian National Police officers, we knew that when it hit the fan, they wouldn't run off and leave us there. But because of that mutual trust and respect, when it hit the fan, they knew we wouldn't run off and leave them either. We would stay with them and fight. So, that's the only explanations we've ever come up with as to how we survived down there. Again, nothing special about us. We're not tough guys. We're not Superman. We're just a couple of professional law enforcement officers.
So, what do you think the success has been like? Because you both seem to have such a great way of connecting with people and building the relationships. If it's with a confidential informant to like the local police guys that are there, to like sort of integrate it well into the Colombian society and stuff like that. What have you learned about this? Because I mean, especially just now with things like the riots and some people's attitudes to law enforcement and stuff like that. I just think it's really bad that people are sort of tarnishing all police with with a bad brush, where there's a lot of great policemen. But what has it taught you about the relationships and building trust with the local communities and things like that?
You know what? Respect. I learned right away when I worked at the prison system. I remember an inmate. I was new. I was scared. I think one of them took me under his wing, and I always remember. He said, "Sir," he says, "you're new here. You just got to remember, they're criminals, but they're also human beings. They're human
Exactly.
beings. treat them with respect, and I always learned that from the beginning. Yeah, we're going through some problems right now, and it's been bad, but we've all, I think Steve and I mean, it was when we worked in Colombia with the police, with the people. It's we were never that ugly American. We always, like you said, it's a two-way street. And I think Steve mentioned it, there were some of the nicest people in the world where we were there, and in law enforcement. You know what? It To me, I've always had that. That common sense, man. You know what? Sometimes, I remember when you would cuff someone, sir, it's hurting. You know what? Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me take it off. I mean, what I'm saying, loosen up. What's wrong with that? In the book, I mentioned it, and I never got in trouble, never got caught. But I mentioned about a guy, around Christmas time. I think he's had about $3,000 in his pocket, and his family's looking at me. It was drug money where I should have taken it, and he just says, "Sir, man, my family, that's all we have. I got three. It was like three kids looking at me, the wife." You know what? I let him have the money. He's going to jail. I mean, it's that human touch. Remember, you got to have respect, but there's also that human side of everybody that, like I said, it's just you gotta, you feel for them, and if something, like you said, the best example is the handcuffs. How many times, and I'm learning too how to put handcuffs, but sir, this is hurting. I'm sorry. Let me take it out, and you loosen them up. I mean, but I just say we got to get better at this. We got to learn, and but just going back to Colombia, it was just that human side of the police that we saw that we never expected, the human side of the innocent person who's getting killed out there. I always question, why the innocent people? Why did Pablo Escobar have to kill all these innocent people with the car bombs, with the assassinations? They didn't have anything to do with this. But anyway, uh, I'll stop at that.
Because I mean, that was the thing that really comes across, even just from the series. But the book really highlights the level of grief and despair and the impact that he had on so many lives and killing so many families and stuff like that. I mean, they're estimated, was it Popeye or second? It was something like 50,000 deaths that could be attributed to him. I mean, how do you start coming to terms with that? How do you change a society like that to help them not be dependent on drugs and stuff like that? Because other cartels were coming in. How did you weigh it? Was the mission just to eliminate Escobar, or was it to help change the infrastructure to kind of move them away from that dependency on those kind of incomes?
Well, I'm just going to be real honest with the answer here. Working with the Colombian National Police, it was made plain to us when we moved to Medellin that this was not about seizing drugs. This was not about seizing money. This was about capturing or killing Pablo Escobar. That's what the purpose, the sole mission of the search block was there in Medellin for 18 months. And the Colombian National Police were able to accomplish their mission. But, the thing is, so you've got these drug dealers who employ violence at the drop of a hat. It's there's a machismo that goes along with that. And if there's a disrespect, if they feel they've been disrespected, they'll whip out a weapon in a heartbeat and kill innocent people. And that's not what the regular Colombians are all about. The drug traffickers are a small percentage of the people down there. And I'll give you an example of the response that we got from a personal experience I had, my wife and I had when we adopted our second daughter down there. Our second daughter's from Medellin. So, we adopted her in May of 1994, and Pablo was killed in December 1993. So, when we filled out the paperwork, and we'd already adopted our first daughter in Bogota back before Pablo was killed in October 93. So, when they asked me where I worked. I told him I worked at the Department of Justice, which is true because DEA belongs to the U.S. Department of Justice. Well, when they sent the paperwork, when I was reviewing the paperwork, it shows my occupation as a lawyer. I never told them that. They just assumed because I worked for the Department of Justice that I was an attorney. And I just never said anything. So when we would go to Medellin, we had to get permission from the ambassador to go up there to adopt our daughter. And he loved the fact that we were adopting Colombian babies, but he was also concerned about our safety. So we were only allowed to travel in the daylight. By the time it got dark, we had to be on a plane back to Bogota. We weren't allowed to spend the night in Medellin. We had to have a massive security detail with us. And so, I called one of the colonels at the Colombian National Police, and they loved the fact that my wife and I were adopting these little babies. And so I had 3 carloads of plainclothes police officers. Now, I told these guys, I said, just be real low key, keep your weapons hidden. We're not expecting any trouble. I just don't want to alarm anybody. And they're like, okay. And when when we would pull up in an office building, the front car and the rear car, the guys would pile out with their weapons out, ready to engage anybody that got close to us. It was very funny. I mean, it was probably alarming to a lot of people, but that's the way it was. So finally, when everything's said and done, we had to make a couple trips to Medellin. And so we're sitting in the director's office, and she said, okay, everything is finalized. This little girl now belongs to you. There's nothing that's legal. Nobody can take her away from you. I'd like to ask you a couple questions, and you're thinking, oh, crap, that's never good. So we said, sure, what is it? And she said, I just want to ask you a question. Who in the hell are you people? And I said, well, you know who we are. You've done a home study on us. You've got all our paperwork. And they said, yeah, you know what? We adopt to Americans all the time, and we've never seen anybody come in here with a security detail like you guys have. I mean, these guys have machine guns. And so, we're sitting there, and I said, well, I work for the Department of Justice. And she said, yeah, but there's got to be more to this story. And I said, well, I thought about it a minute. I said, okay. I said, have you ever heard of DEA? DEA is the way they say it in Spanish. And she said, I knew it. I knew it had to be something like that. And I looked at this director, and I said, do we have a problem? And she said, no. Let me tell you what, she said, first of all, very proud of what you've done to help our country. I told her we were part of the search block and all that. And she said, let me just tell you my story. She said, my 17-year-old son was out with some of his buddies doing what 17-year-olds do. I mean, I remember when I was 17 years old, I was trying to find, somebody to buy my beer and chase girls. And she said they were just out having some fun on their own. And 2 rival drug gangs showed up, got into an argument, and there was a gun battle. And her 17-year-old son was killed by a stray bullet. That story just happens over and over and over again during the Escobar days. And here's this lady. She said, please tell your partner, and this is to you and your wife, thank you so much for what you did for our country to come down here and get rid of this scourge. That's what real Colombians are all about. And Javier and I, we traveled all the world. We've been on every continent now except Africa and Antarctica. We're supposed to go to Africa in May, and it got canceled because of the virus. But everywhere we go, there are Colombians in the audience. And every time they come up and thank us for what we had to do with changing history in their country. So, we kind of wear that as a badge of honor. It's not what we went down there to do, but the fact that all these years later, Colombians still come to us and thank us for what we did to get rid of the Escobar and the Medellin Cartel regime down there. We wear it as a badge of honor now.
As you should. I mean, and that's the difference. It's like when a lot of people nowadays look at these kind of shows, because we love like excitement and bullets and nut bangs and all that kind of stuff. They always make it out to be like, the heroes fighting everybody and all this kind of stuff. But they kind of really, because I'm really into gangster stuff and into these kind of like famous enforcement agencies and the FBI, CIA, all these kind of things. But you learn the truth about it, and it's very rarely what they show on the TV, even when they base it on a true story. But I mean, what did you think when they came to you and said that he'd been killed? I know that the Narcos series had shown that you were there on the rooftop, but it was a Colombian sort of mission, and that Connie had gone back to like Miami with the kids, but that wasn't true and things like that. But at that point, what was going through your mind? Was it the fact that, oh, right, that's that mission done, going on to the next one? Or, like, how, did the book help you then come to terms with what had happened? Have you only just kind of putting the whole escapade to rest because you then went on to your next mission and just carried on going after the next perpetrator?
Well, you know what? And let me go first because Steve was there and he can, tell you that. I wasn't there. I was gone. I mean, the ambassador ordered me to go to Miami. It's different from what the show depicts. It's just basically an informant got a hold of the ambassador that he only wanted to talk to me, that he knew where Pablo Escobar was. I tried to argue with our ambassador. I tried to tell him, sir, we are very close. And the ambassadors are like presidents. He says, if you don't go, I will kick you out of the country. So I ended up, all right. And I knew we were close to him anyway. So I got on a plane and, the person that tells me that Pablo has been killed is the informant. I'll never forget. He's on the phone. He puts the phone down and says, Javier, they just killed Pablo Escobar. So anyway, I got on the phone. And you know what? Just before Steve starts, I was elated. I was happy because now, what, there's justice of all the innocent people, all the police officer, all the friends we had killed by Pablo Escobar. Finally, justice was served. I wish it would have been served earlier. That would have saved a lot of innocent people. But it's something that you can't explain because it's you've been chasing him for so long. In the chase, like we've mentioned, was personal. So of course I was very happy. I go there. We go the next day. We pick up Steve. I go congratulate all the cops, and we come back. And Steve, go ahead, man.
Well, and Ian, I'm glad you brought up about people seeing things on TV and believing what they see, because everything you see on television is not true. And the Narcos series is a prime example. It's a dramatization, and they want to make it exciting so people will come on board and watch, because they make money off subscribership. But for me, initially, when I'm standing in the colonel's office, listening to the operation going down, you're starting to get excited. But we had come so close so many times before and missed Pablo. So you're just a little hesitant to get too excited because you're going to think, you're thinking, oh no, is this going to be another dashed hopes that we finally got this guy? But when they came across and finally said, Viva Colombia, Pablo is dead, there was a lot of backslapping going on. I was standing in the colonel's office, Colonel Martinez's office, with his executive staff, shaking hands. Everybody was elated. Honestly, you felt like the pressure of the world had been lifted off your shoulders. But then, I go to call my boss, and he said, listen, get out there and confirm that this really is Pablo. And then, you're all excited, and you think, oh, yeah, you know what? That's true. It could be the wrong person. So I rode out, like you said, Marco shows I was on the roof. I was not. I was back at the base, and I rode out to the scene after Pablo was dead with Colonel Martinez. So when we got there, it turns out that I had the only camera that was working that day. And so all the photographs that were taken until the press showed up, I took the pictures. And so we get down there, and I finally get up on the roof where his body is. And of course, you look at it, and it does look like him. It looks, he was quite a bit heavier than what I'd seen in photographs before. That was the first time I'd ever seen Pablo Escobar, is after he was already killed. So, they come in and they do a fingerprint analysis, and of course that came back positive. But the real telling fact for me that was Pablo Escobar is when his mother and his sister showed up. Because his sister, the bodyguard, the lone Sicario that was with him that day, when he was killed, he fell off the roof onto the ground. Well, I'm standing on the roof when the mother and the daughter show up. And I'm watching them, and the daughter, Pablo's sister, becomes very irate with the police officers. I want to see if that really is my brother over there, And so she kind of bullies her way over to where the Sicario's laying on the ground, Limon. And she looks at him and she starts berating the government officials there, the police officers. You guys, this is not Pablo Escobar. You're so incompetent. You've killed the wrong person. This is probably an innocent man. And she just goes on and on and on. And they let her go for several minutes. And when she finally calms down, they said, hey, go take a look up on the roof. So she, I get out of the way by that time so she can't see me. But when I saw her see her brother on the roof, that was confirmation for me that actually was Pablo Escobar. We've heard all the conspiracy theories out there that that wasn't Pablo Escobar. He's still running around with Elvis or Jimmy Hoffa or whoever, all these other legends that are out there. But we know for a fact it wasn't. That was Pablo Escobar. And what we also found out, and this is proof in the pudding as well, is we looked at the murder statistics prior to Pablo's death, and then a couple months after his death, we checked the murder statistics again in Medellin, Colombia, which in 92 and 93 was the murder capital of the entire world. The murder rate after Pablo was killed dropped by almost 80%, simply because Pablo was gone. If he was still alive, he'd go right back into business. It would have been just as dangerous as ever. So, quite honestly, elation doesn't do it justice. The next day Javier flew up, and after we met with everybody, I flew out with him and got back to Bogota that night. It was a Friday night. My wife and another agent's wife had planned out this party in the embassy. We were drinking beer and eating pizzas in the embassy, and it was probably about 6:30, 7 o'clock. We got home. We finally left the embassy and started hitting the bars. We got home at daylight on Saturday morning. It was an all-nighter for us. But the feeling was it's really hard to describe. You just felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off your shoulders. But then it's like you also said, Ian, once we had a lot of loose ends to tie up, working with Colombian National Police and just getting questions answered and all that. But when the case was over, we simply moved on to the next case because that's what our job was.
So what kind of thing, is it just a case of just replacing for going after the next cartel that comes in? What kind of reaction did you see in the Colombian people? Because they must have been elated that, you'd helped them, their police take back their country.
Right. The Colombians were very happy. They were elated. They were glad because they knew that the car bombing, the indiscriminate killings, would stop. And remember, Escobar killed a lot of innocent people just for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. So Colombia was happy. Now, the drug industry stopped for about 2 weeks. Then it started all over again. So we forgot about the Cali cartel. We did forget. We just weren't concentrating on them. Cali cartel was learning from Pablo Escobar. Cali cartel was business. They were organized. Pablo was wild, wild west. So while we were going after Pablo, the Cali cartel was sitting in isolation. They were doing their dope, more sophisticated. They were getting stronger and stronger until we went after them. Then we took them down. Then the North Valley cartel started. So, long story short, as soon as you take down one cartel, there's another one to take it over.
That's the thing, isn't it? There's always going to be the attraction to easy money. There's always going to be those bullies that think that they can control it, they can be the boss. And there's, unfortunately, until we kind of fix society and, better education, better pay for jobs and stuff, there's always going to be people who look for that shortcut. And I don't know how you deal with that. How do you change the youths? Do you think it's better drug education? I know your opinions on legislation and things like that, but do you kind of think there needs to be more education given to young people about the dangers of drugs, but also where it comes from and the damage it does to the society and the people who are involved in it?
Absolutely. And Javier and I are big proponents of this, and we love it when people ask this question at our shows. And this we don't have a definitive answer. If we did, we'd be multimillionaires if we had the answer to all the world's drug problems, wouldn't we? But we are big proponents of education at the earliest possible age. I have 5 granddaughters now. If it takes scaring the crap out of them in first or second grade to indoctrinate them that how bad drugs are, how the violence that goes along with it, I'm okay with that. I think that we should educate our children at the earliest possible age. We have a program here in the United States called the AreTheir program that would go into the elementary schools and the middle schools and teach the kids the dangers of narcotics. And, one of the political administrations here in the United States cut it several years ago, cut the funding. It's now being funded through private monies. I'm not sure where they come from, but at least it's getting back out in the schools. But Javier and I, we've been to a lot of shows where people would come up to us and yeah, I remember in the AreTheir program when I was school, that was such a good program. We got to know the police officer, plus, we learned about the dangers of narcotics and the violence associated with it and all that. But also on top of that, and this is not to take away from the men and women of law enforcement out there, the brave men and women who are willing to put uniforms on to protect us. So please don't take this out of context. But we as a world cannot arrest our way out of the drug problem. We cannot put all these people in jail and expect the problem to go away, because there's so many other evil people out there waiting to take their place. So one of the programs that DEA has come up with here in the United States, and we've been retired for a while now, but I'm real proud of what they're doing. It's not fair to go into our police and say, go fix this problem, or our legislators, or any single group, and expect them to make the drug problem go away. We need to take the community approach, is our opinion. In addition to education, we need to bring our law enforcement together with our legislators, together with our professional businessmen, our housewives, our faith-based communities, the doctors, the pharmacists from the pharmaceutical companies. We need to bring the whole community together to attack this problem, and then view it as a community problem. Not, hey, I don't have any problems in my family, it's not my issue. It's everybody's issue, because it's having a direct negative impact on every facet of our society. It's just ridiculous. So is that the final answer? I don't know. I wish I did have the answer. We discuss this all the time, and that's the best things that we've come up with so far. So, I challenge your listeners out there, think about this, and don't hesitate to get involved. If there's something you can do to help your community, jump in there and do your part. Do the most you can to help out your fellow citizens there.
Because that's the thing, isn't it? Is everybody assumes the government's going to deal with it, or the police are going to deal with it, and it's all about educating, like, your own kid or your nephew or just yourself about the dangers of drugs.
It is, and you know what? Let me just say this also, because I know you're in the UK, and a lot of our UK fans will be listening to this, and I got to tell you, we love coming over there. You guys are a hoot to hang out with. It's a lot of fun every time we come over, but. We're not saying this as the ugly Americans telling you what should be done in your country. Here in the United States, we have the dubious reputation of having the highest demand for illegal narcotics in the world. That's not a reputation we're proud of. So, when we throw these ideas out there, we're talking about our own country, and if you can implement them in your countries as well and it works, God bless you. I think that's fantastic.
Now, something I've often wondered is you never got a chance to sort of meet Pablo face to face, but you eliminated his organization, you've changed so many people's lives, you've helped so many people out of like such a dangerous time. But if you had a chance to meet him, is it a question that you've always wanted to know, or were you just so kind of focused on getting rid of him and eliminating the danger that he was to the Colombian society? Would you have wanted to ask him something, or like his motives even, or do you just assume that they're plain evil?
I'll go first on it, and it's not a question. It's just more of a comment. Why the innocent people? What did they have to do in this? Why the women, the children, being on that commercial airline, the people at a building that people love? It was just, why did you get all this innocent people involved? I mean, I know the answer why, but it's just that to me has always, hey, if you're a drug trafficker, deal with your own, but innocent people, why did you have to get them involved?
Definitely.
And for me, I have nothing to say to that man if he were still alive, other than goodbye. But on top of him being the world's biggest cocaine manufacturer and distributor, if you go back and check the records, he married his wife when she was 13 years old. Well, in your country, in our country, we call that a pedophile. And she came out with her book last year stating that she actually had an abortion when she was 12 years old. Or when she had an abortion when she was 13 because he got her pregnant when she was 12 years old, and he's in his mid-20s. If he were still alive, there is absolutely nothing I'd have to say to that guy.
The relationship between you two has been something that I noticed really, it's really strong. It's super developed. You've now, even after retirement, you're still great friends. What has this taught you about teamwork, working together, friendship? You've toured the world, you've given your talks, you've discussed everything that's happened between you. What has it taught you about friendship?
Well, you know what, and the cooperation you need. Steve and I, and we're complete opposites. You know, there's a lot of differences between us, but that never made a difference. It worked, and we trusted each other. We knew what we were doing, and even in our speaking business, our presentations, I mean, we have it down where it's, yeah, we know what one's going to say, the other one, and but it's you need that trust that you have with one another, and always know that, you know what, there's going to be that person there. Something goes wrong, you can always, there's that backup, basically. So it's something that, you know, and I think it's, and Steve will explain it back. You know, he explains it best. Our what happened in the show. So you would take the show aspect, Steve.
Yeah, they they added a lot of, like in the show they show Javier now shoving each other and cussing each other out and pushing and almost getting into a fist fight. We've never even had a disagreement. It's funny how it's portrayed. And even when we were working the case back in Colombia, other agents in our office, we were friends with them and really close friends down there. And they would even come to us and say, "You two guys are unbelievable, man. You guys are complete opposites, but you've got the best partnership we've ever seen." And these are experienced law enforcement officers. And it's Javier's right. We're pretty much different from each other, but I think my weaknesses are his strengths and vice versa. So it's just worked out for us. Once we left Colombia, we kind of lost contact with each other. We'd see each other maybe once every year, or every other year at conferences and things like that. And the funny thing is about law enforcement, my wife has always mentioned this. I can go years without seeing a brother police officer or sister police officer, and I can see him tomorrow, and we pick right up where we left off, and it's like we've been friends every day. We've been talking every day, and she's like, "How in the world do you guys do that?" But it's just part of that law enforcement culture where it's kind of cliche to say this, but it is a family type atmosphere. It's when you go through multiple life and death situations with somebody and you survive. I mean, you just develop a relationship that's closer than brotherhood and sisterhood. It's kind of hard to explain unless you've experienced it. And it's not just law enforcement. Military is the same way. Any occupation that is very high risk, firemen, first responders, even electricians working out there on those high power lines. It's pretty much the same for everybody.
Because that's true friendship, isn't it? It's when you can just immediately pick up where if you haven't spoken to somebody for months, but you can pick it up like you were speaking to them yesterday. It's like, and it's like nothing's changed at all. It's kind of, it does show true friendship, and there's that brotherhood of the police, and it's fantastic to see the relationship you guys have. But was there anything that annoyed you about the Narcos series that you thought didn't represent you truly? I mean, was Javier really that much of a dating megastar, do you think?
Well,
Yeah.
I
that's
was
the
going to
one
ask
part
him
of
for some tips.
that's the one part of Narcos is true. He was a
right.
man slut.
Yeah, you know what? I tell people, if you like the sex that I was involved with, then yes, it is true.
Yep. There was, one of the things that bothers both of us
Yeah.
is it shows us in the scene in the series. It shows that before they do anything, they light a cigarette, they drink a beer, and they cuss. They drop the F-bomb. Neither one of us even smoked, and we certainly didn't drink like they did in the embassy.
Right, right.
Because that's the thing, you look at the both of you and you think, these are like James Bond, like wannabes. You're knocking back the whiskies, and I think you must have been on about like 400 cigarettes a day. And I was like,
And the other one I think you mentioned earlier was the affiliation with Los Pepes. We were not corrupt. We were not passing information or helping them out. We knew them, but we didn't know the head Don Berna. And we explained in the book where he was an informant for the government of Colombia. And after we, like I said, he was always at the base, but we did not know he was the head of Los Pepes until about after 2 years. We find out that he was the real leader of Los Pepes, and kind of interesting. So people will know that he turned out to be a drug trafficker, and afterwards, the United States extradited him, and he's serving 30 years in prison in the United States. I think he's about to get out, either 4 or 5 more years. But again, we were not, let's say, complicit with Los Pepes.
Because that's the thing, it's like, again, it's that kind of, they just insinuate that, and it's that kind of thing of like, people then believe that because it's on TV. So people
Right,
immediately assume, rather than do their own research and find stuff. And it must be so frustrating that people can kind of assume that about you. And because it's Hollywood, it's because it's on Netflix, and people go, oh, yeah, that must be true. It's this whole
right.
fake news thing. I mean, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump in any way, but it's the lack of critical thinking or analysis that so many people have about their
It's
own choices.
and that's true, Ian. And we just said a while ago, we love coming to the UK. Whether it's England, Scotland, Ireland. We haven't been to Wales, but we hope to go there someday also. But we really do enjoy coming over there. But I got to be honest with you, Europe. It seems like everybody believes everything they saw in the Narcos series, especially when it comes to the Q&A, because they're saying, well, when this happened, how did you handle that? Well, that didn't really happen. That was Hollywood. Well, what'd you do when you came home and they hung your cat on your front door? That didn't happen. That's Hollywood. Well, Steve, how did you handle it when you were kidnapped? I was never kidnapped. That was Hollywood. It's just funny that it seems like whether it's not just the UK, but we've done a Northern European tour through the Scandinavian countries, and it was the same way there. It's like the people believe what they saw on Narcos. They believe every bit of it was true.
But
You
it
have
made
to,
for an interesting series, and it made for people watching it. So I guess,
Yeah.
in a way, hey, we're getting the fruits out of it.
Yep.
well, now's a perfect time. I mean, I know we're way over our limit. I would love to do a second one where we really get into the nitty gritty. But I mean, I think you're both heroes for what you did. It's amazing to see the careers you had. I turned up to your book tour when it was in Glasgow, Scotland, and it was so illuminating. It was so good to see the truth of it, not just what happened, but with the Hollywood shine, but to actually see what you guys did. And
Hello.
the book is amazing because you
Yeah.
go into the true details. You go into what didn't work, the negative aspects, the mistakes you've made. You admit your own failings, and it's so refreshing to see it from that point. So now's a perfect time to sell the book. How can we get it? How can we find it? But why should people buy it, do you think?
Well, our book, Manhunters, How We Took Down Pablo Escobar, it tells the truth. It's just like our shows. That's what it's all about. That's the reason we do them, is we want the world to know the truth. And in our book, Manhunters, it goes in a little more detail about how we grew up, some of the other cases we worked on. It's not all just about Pablo Escobar, but it does culminate with the true story about what really happened there. In the UK, our publisher there is Headline Publishers. So you can, unfortunately, here in the United States, we're not allowed to sell the book outside the United States because of customs and excise taxes and agreements. And, Headline Publishers bought the right to publish our book in the UK. So just go to their website or give them a call. You can order it there. And I promise you, you will, you will read the true story about what really happened. We're not Superman. We're just a couple of ordinary guys.
In the book is the actual history of the search of Pablo Escobar, witnessed, participated by Steve and I, who were actually there.
I love it. I mean, and what do you want people to take from this interview? If it's like if there's one sort of go home message to them, what would it be? It can be about drugs, it can be about the Escobar, it can be friendship. What would you want them to be as a central theme or message to take from this?
Well, for me, please don't believe everything somebody else tells you, whether it's the media, especially the media. Do your own research, find out what really happened, and then you make the conclusions. Don't let the media tell you what's right and what's wrong and how you should believe. We're seeing that so much, especially here in the United States, and especially right now. What's going on here is horrible. There's a saying that's going around here that I think Javier and I both agree with 100%. Nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop, and we agree with that wholeheartedly. So mistakes are made here, but again, you research whatever the issue is, and you make your own determination. Please don't let other people tell you what to think. You got a brain, use it. Make up your own decisions.
And always remember, and I think we stress it in our show, in the book, the real heroes were the Colombian National Police. They took their country back, and we try to highlight some of the heroes in the book who deserve all the credit. So, and please, we always visit Colombia. It's a safe country. It's a beautiful country. Great people. So we encourage to visit.
Well, for anybody listening who wants to get the book, could you just go give your website? Could you give your social media handles? Because you're always doing tours. You've got some great content there. So how can people find you?
Yeah, just go on our website is www.deanarcos.com. We have a calendar on there that shows when and where we'll be in the world. Of course, right now it's blank because of the virus that's going around, but we're hoping that'll go away soon and we'll get back on the road. We're actually hoping to get back for our third UK tour. I don't think it'll happen in 2020, but maybe in 2021. Because when we say we love coming there, we're not kidding. That's my wife came over with us one time, and Javier's wife, and we just had a blast when we were over there. But also on our website, there's videos, there's a lot of photographs from when they're on the road. There's just a lot of different things on there. Unfortunately, you cannot order the book outside the United States from our website, but if you just go to Headline Publishers, you're good. And if you're on social media, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at DEA Narcos. We appreciate it if you check us out and follow us there. We're also on YouTube and Vimeo and LinkedIn under DEA Narcos. So just, 3 years ago, I couldn't tell you when any of that meant, but now we're all over social media. So come and check us out and like us.
And for me, I can't wait to do another European tour, so I'm ready.
Well, that's it for another week, and thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.